This is a Fleet Success Show, dedicated to helping you and your fleet succeed using the experience of fleet professionals and Hall of Fame fleet legends. The show that explores how the pillars of stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management all combine to lead your fleet to success. We're glad you're here. Now, let's get into the show. All right, welcome back for another episode of the Fleet Success Show with your hosts, Josh Turley, Marc Canton.
Hey, everybody.
And you've recently been doing some episodes, I guess, presentations on resource efficiency, one of the four pillars that we have for fleet success.
That's right.
And we wanted to talk about maybe something we don't talk a lot about. And given some of our expertise, right, for those who don't know, I'm the CEO over at RTA Fleet. I've been here almost 20 years, serving the fleet industry. I have a technology and business and whatever background you want to give me. But I'm big on efficiency and supply chain and those kind of metrics, right?
Right.
You previously ran Fordham University.
That's right.
And have been a consultant for a number of years.
Yep.
And so you've seen a ton of good fleets, bad fleets, and everything in between.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
But we were talking a little bit, and as we talk about resource efficiency, you and I are both aligned on this, which is the number one metric is availability.
Right.
It's the whole purpose of a fleet.
That's
Is
right.
to be available for the job to get done.
Exactly.
But the thing that doesn't really get talked a lot about, and maybe we talk about it a little bit when we start talking about right sizing and right typing for a fleet, is how you get to that point, and it's utilization.
It's utilization, big time.
Right. So it's not something we've done a ton of episodes on, but it's something that has recently come to your mind.
Right.
About why utilization is so important and how the way that we're tracking it is completely wrong.
Correct.
Right. So one of the things, for our listeners, when I think about utilization, right? Well, I guess first, before I even dive in, utilization, when you think of it, what do you mean when you're telling a fleet manager, what's your utilization rate?
Right.
What are you looking at?
Well, that's a great question.
Traditionally, and then let's talk about, like how we're looking at it wrong.
Bingo. Because when I ask that question, I know what they're going to tell me. I expect them to tell me how many miles that they drive on it. If we're talking about assets that aren't over the road, I expect them to tell me about engine hours, runtime, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Some more sophisticated fleet managers might start pulling into fuel burn and things of that nature. And generally speaking, for government fleets, schools and really most fleets, that's what they're going to talk about. On the private side, especially like in the construction world and utilities world, where fleet is a profit center, not only a cost center, right? They have a completely different meaning for utilization. And it's all about, did I bill it? How close to 100% of the time that I could have billed it, did I bill it?
Right.
And that's what utilization means for them. It means nothing about the, let's say, objective quantity of use of the asset. Yeah. And to your point, yes, I'm here today to to essentially argue that we need to really expand our minds a little bit more on how we think of utilization and how we're measuring it, if our goal is ultimately good resource efficiency, right? Which is the goal, right? So yeah, that's kind of the preface here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as I think about utilization, right? I don't remember who it was. It might have been John Doerr. And we were talking about OKRs, right? This is the guy that came from Intel. Basically, him and Andy Grove had this whole thing, management by objective.
Right.
He basically spawned what we call objectives and key results, OKRs, very popular goal setting framework.
Right.
But he talked about key results and having what we call a quantity-quality pair.
Right.
And when I think about availability, that's a terrific quantity metric.
Yes.
But what it doesn't have is necessarily a quality pair. That's obvious anyways. And, as I've talked to you, as I've talked to Steve, and we've seen this in fleets, there's a very easy way to get your availability up. It's expensive. It's expensive as hell.
Right.
But you basically just increase your spare fleet.
Right.
Right. If you have, let's say that let's keep this super simple. Let's say you've got 1,000 vehicles and 30 of them are down. You've essentially got a 3% down rate or a 97% availability rate, which looks awesome.
This is phenomenal. Right.
But what if you only needed 500?
Right.
That means you've got 500 spare vehicles.
Exactly.
And really, your availability rate, instead of being 97%, is 3 out of 500,
Right.
which is, it's 90, what is that, 97 or 93%, 94%.
Right.
And what I realized is that, wow, you could really stack the deck and just change the denominator when you think about, what are my total availability vehicles over my, total assets.
Right.
And so it's very easy to kind of change that metric just based on, well, I'll just have a bunch of spare fleet. And usually that's almost the first red flag.
That is it.
Is that, hey, your availability, maybe it's down or it's low, but when we see a lot of vehicles just sitting in the yard, or your fleet size doesn't quite match, maybe your population size, or,
Right.
the trucking companies are notorious for this. They have a gajillion trailers
Right.
and only a handful of power units, right? Well, it's because
Right.
the trailers are cheap, they're easy, you don't really have to maintain them.
And nobody questions do you need a trailer in a trucking
right?
situation.
And you never want to be out of trailers, but
Right.
yet you go around any dispatch yard and there's just a
Right.
ton of them sitting there.
Right.
But we also see this in white fleets. You
Yeah.
see this at universities.
Well, in every fleet, really.
Every fleet, there's always some kind of spare, right?
Yeah, and that's part of our point around availability, right?
Yeah.
Just, excuse me to interrupt you, but it's, hey, your availability is low. Necessarily, you have too much fleet, because that's the only way. Well, it's not the only way. There's one of 5 ways, but that's the most common way.
Yeah.
So people are doing exactly what you're saying. They're stacking the deck by accident in many cases,
Yeah.
and their availability is still low. So that's a wormhole that I won't go down that or rabbit hole.
But what it actually means is that their availability is worse than they think it is.
That's exactly correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
because they've not done the right sizing and actually look to see how many vehicles aren't even moving.
Right.
And so the utilization is really to kind of keep that availability metric honest.
Correct.
And so a lot of fleets, when we talk about how do they track utilization today, and I think you and I both agree they're tracking it wrong.
Agreed.
Most of the time I see fleets, they'll track it either by a certain number of miles threshold.
Right.
Like it's got to travel at least 500 miles in a year.
Right.
They'll track it by, maybe number of trips or something like that, which I think number of trips is actually not terrible. Gallons used, I see that one a lot. That it has to have burned so many gallons of fuel.
Right.
Because you get
And that can make
police
sense.
fleet, like
Right.
it's idling or something like that, like a fire apparatus or whatnot.
Right.
But we think that, they might be looking at the wrong metrics.
Yeah.
Sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And you gave a great example. This is something you tell people all the time.
Right.
And that's the, like the plumber truck example.
Yeah.
And I think fire apparatus would probably fall into the same category.
Yeah, in many cases. I mean, fire apparatus is interesting because hopefully your utilization's way down on it, right?
True story.
That's a kind of a different asset where it's almost an insurance
Yeah.
policy, right?
But when you think about like the plumber truck example,
exactly.
For our listeners,
Yeah.
kind of walk them through that example
Sure.
and why you think that we're measuring utilization wrong.
Yeah, I think plumbers and frankly a lot of the trades folks are great examples of this, right? And especially in the context of folks are under more and more pressure to justify what fleet assets that they need right now. So, let's just take your average plumber's van, right? It could be plumber's truck, whatever it is. I worked at a university, so it's very relevant there. But maybe you work at a town, a municipality, or you have some buildings at your corporation. And so you have your plumbing team. And that plumbing team maybe takes their van and they travel 2 miles around town or, downtown, let's say, and they're going to go spend a day at a particular building that's part of your purview.
Yep.
And they're going to fix 10 or 100 work orders that they're going to go attack, right? They're going to get there. Maybe they drive 2 miles there, park the thing. It's not going to run. It's not going to have a lot of miles. It's not going to burn a lot of engine fuel or have a lot of engine hours.
Because it's off.
It's off. Okay. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
this plumber is back and forth from this van, getting supplies, getting parts, getting tools, maybe even using tools that are installed on there, like a welder or something like that slides out, right? And they spend 8 hours there, let's just say, and they're fixing, various tasks that they've been assigned to fix all day. That is a highly utilized asset, especially in the context of what its mission is.
Yep.
And what its purpose is, why it exists, and why that organization is bothering to spend money on acquiring that asset.
Right.
It's to fulfill that role. And so I would argue that was a highly utilized asset in that scenario. But it would
Even if the mileage used,
Correct.
right? Like let's say this is a super dense city like New York.
Right.
And, maybe the mileage, like they only drive 5 miles in a day.
Exactly.
It might not ever cross that 500 mile threshold.
Right. Yeah.
And so based on common metrics, we would get rid of that vehicle.
Correct.
Even though it's fulfilling the mission.
Exactly. And we'd be asking their, whatever that department's fleet coordinator to justify it, and we'd be questioning it. And the point is here that I think we're trying to get at is not only did that analysis not give us the answer we were hoping for,
Right.
it actually pointed us in the wrong direction, wasted our time, wasted our stakeholders' time,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the other piece. This is where the pillars, we always say fleet's a web and pillars overlap, right? But from the stakeholder satisfaction perspective of it, you're constantly pushing that. Say, do you really need that van? Come on, man. You put
Right.
1,000 miles a year on it. You don't need that van. And they constantly have to defend them. So they feel like they got to defend their work, their existence, right? Like
Yeah.
this is exactly what they're here for. And so, yeah, I think what I'm encouraging folks to do is, number one, embrace the stakeholder satisfaction piece by really understanding and engaging with folks and understand what is the work that they're accomplishing with fleet.
Yep.
And if you understand that and you put your minds together and you do a little thinking, I think you can come up with much better utilization metrics that better match what the use case is for that asset. In this case, you might come up with something like work orders accomplished, days utilized, work orders per day, you know, something that is actually an indicator of how well we fulfilled or how much of our mission we fulfilled with that asset. Because that's what utilization really is. It's the fulfillment of our mission by use of this asset. How much of that did we do? Right. And that's what I perceive it to be anyway. And so, yeah, there are use cases like the long haul trucking where miles makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. Right. Absolutely. That's not to say that metric never matters. But in the average municipality or government setting or school setting, I mean,
or service fleet, white van fleet.
Absolutely. The data is overwhelming. We've studied enough fleets. We have, you know, fleets data in our system. You know, you'll find things very commonly of like 6,000 miles a year for an average light duty asset. And then go to AAA or go to the Department of Transportation, you know, the federal government's website, and look at what they record as averages for the region and the state and so forth. And you'll see things like 12,000 miles a year and 15,000 miles a year. Right. Which means that us retail customers are driving that for the most part. And that's where those numbers are coming from. And yet I talk to fleet managers all the time, and, you know, they're obsessed with the fact that, hi, I'm only getting 6,000 miles a year out of this thing. Like, yeah, that's all you're ever going to get. Right. You know, good luck. Motor pool might be exception. You can usually hit reasonable numbers there. So anyway, that's what I'm getting at. You know, in this case, you're barking up the wrong tree. You think that vehicle is underutilized. You're trying to figure out what you can do to replace it. And again, it's a bunch of wasted effort. And if you accomplish your goal and replace or get rid of it, eliminate it, you've hurt your organization, right? So I want folks to, you know, my message today is, I said to you, I was like, I really feel passionately about this. I want folks to kind of think a little more. I don't know if it's even outside the box as much as it's get in the box with your stakeholder and sit with them for a little bit and tell them, hey, this is what I got to do. I got to go to leadership and tell them that you're using the vehicle or you're not. How do I do that? What's a good way that we can accomplish that?
How do we measure the success of this unit, right?
Where can you get access to insightful keynotes from fleet industry leaders and experts, live hands-on training classes, and the opportunity to network with fleet professionals across the country? Only at the Fleet Event of the Year. RTA Connect 2024 in Atlanta, Georgia. Join us October 7th to 11th and get the tips, tricks, and tools you need to take your fleet to the next level. Learn the latest best practices to improve performance from RTA's fleet experts. Join hundreds of fleet professionals from every industry to learn everything from employee retention and growth to the latest in fleet tech. Ensure you're building the best fleet in the world at Connect 2024.
Registration is now open and class seats are limited. Visit www.rtafleet.com/connect to learn more.
And I think this is where, you know, we talk about jobs theory, and we talk about, hey, when you buy a 1/4-inch drill bit, you're really not buying a 1/4-inch drill bit, you're buying a 1/4-inch hole. And you have to understand the job to be done by that asset. We've talked about tools like Zard, right? Steve and I've mentioned that. I think you and I have talked about it. You know, basically the zero-based, you know, asset research definition, where it's what are we actually using this unit for? And then you sit down together and you come up with a common language around, you know, and it's metrics really. It's deciding how are we going to measure the metrics on that unit. And every unit has a specific metric to track utilization. That means you got to figure out how you're going to measure it. It's not enough just to come up and say, well, we'll track it based on days used. Okay, well, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to track it? It's interesting, you know, as somebody who's used our system for a long time, like this is something Grandpa designed back in the 90s, right? It was as simple as just, hey, when you're doing your fuel entries, tally up a quick little tally mark, as low tech as that is, right?
But it works.
But it worked. And a lot of people, I would say 95% of our customers don't even use that field because they're not tracking utilization that way.
Correct.
Right? I've seen others, they'll use it based on, especially fixed route. This is a really good method for them, is look at the number of times that, you know, that vehicle was used on a route that. Maybe it was used for multiple routes in the day, but if it was used for one, then it counts. How many times for motor pool vehicles? How often were they checked out? And you could just look at a green-blue board and say, you know, show me all the days it was checked out and show me all the days it didn't get checked out. That's underutilization if it didn't get checked out. Right? That's a motor fuel vehicle that's not fulfilling its purpose and obligation.
Bingo. It's so funny, quick on the motor pool one, because we talk about that a lot, and it does generally have higher over-the-road utilization for all sorts of reasons. You know, then we'll be talking, and it's pretty much doesn't matter, right? The over-the-road utilization is irrelevant. To your point, what matters is, did it get checked out that day? Because that means that some job needed to get performed that was worth someone's resources to pay for it.
Yeah.
to get that job done. That was needed. I don't care if it went downtown, stayed parked all day, and all it did was load boxes into it. It's totally irrelevant. So it's a very interesting point that you just made. I find that one, fascinating. Now with motor pool, you have a way to track it, right?
Yes.
Because normally if you have
tracking reservations,
right.
check in, check out.
Correct.
So it's a little easier.
Yeah.
And I'll even go so far as to do like a full overlay. And that's how I'm going to get like that spare ratio. Because, it might have been used 3 times that week.
Yeah, that's ideal. Yep.
Were you completely out of vehicles and it was the only vehicle left?
Bingo.
Or
Right.
are you trying to spread the load and load manage between several assets?
Right.
Because that can also affect your utilization.
Right. And that's the message to the corporate friends out there,
Yeah.
right? Because they think, I got 97% utilization. My boss loves me because we're getting all this income associated with charging out for this vehicle. And it's like, well, yeah, but suppose you could have made the exact same revenue, but only had the expense for 90% of the assets or 80% of the assets that you have an expense for. Wouldn't you look even better? Wouldn't your P&L look even better? So again, whatever world or segment or industry, it still falls back to this concept of coming up with the appropriate utilization metric for that use case. That's what you need. And when you do that, and again, try to think beyond. It doesn't mean throw away all of the ones you're using because there might be some insight gleaned from them, but kind of go beyond that.
To that point is, when you're looking at something and maybe miles used is good for 90% of your fleet.
Right, exactly.
And maybe it's good to identify even those ones that are, like the plumber vehicle.
Right.
That you start, it just gets another level of scrutiny.
Right.
But the idea would be is that take another further look and make sure that you're not looking past the mark.
Right.
No pun intended, Mark. But the idea of trying to truly understand what that job is to be done and how you're measuring it, how you capture it.
Right.
But there could be an opportunity for consolidation even at that level.
Exactly.
And so that's what you're really looking for is, hey, make sure you're tracking the right metrics. And then once you know you are, then look to see if there's opportunities to right size the fleet, get rid of that vehicle, have that conversation with that stakeholder of like, hey, I've actually got a better way for us to handle this, and that's to do, maybe a shared motor pool vehicle, or maybe there's a different type of asset that we could be using for that instead of a big old service van.
Exactly. That's the kind of conversation that comes out of doing this, that you end up getting wins you weren't even searching for by going through the exercise of it. So I think that's a great point. And you mentioned something else earlier too that I want to emphasize is this concept of the overlay, right? Yeah. You could be using that asset every day, but if they're not, let's say you got 2 assets and one's used, 6 to 2 and the other one's 3 to 10.
Like the overlay.
It's important, because you have, major opportunities there. You see some of this in fleets. Some of them, let's say fleets that are.
I want to make sure we're hitting that and that people understand what we're talking about when we say the overlay, right? And so the concept I was mentioning, I don't think I explained it very well.
Okay.
Mark just hit it, which is that if we just check whether or not a vehicle was used in a day, right? It doesn't tell us the full story because a vehicle might have been used from like 6 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Right.
And then maybe it didn't get used the rest of the day. And there might be another vehicle that wasn't used all morning, and then it got checked out from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Right.
Technically, one vehicle could have done the job of both. And so what you're looking for is that overlay between the two. And you'll see, like if you stacked them right next to each other, you would see a solid line of, blue basically in-house, right, versus green checked out. And you'd be able to look at the overlay to show you that you have a spare fleet, that you have an underutilized asset. Between the two of them, you had one utilization. And not, every hour is basically the way you look at that, is you break it down that
Bingo.
way. So,
yeah, so you could be scoring high on your utilization metric and still be underutilized.
It still have an excess spare fleet.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Again, our goals was always we should be pushing towards maximizing resource efficiency, right? That's the implied comment there when we talk resource efficiency. So there's your opportunity to do it. I will caveat quickly.
Yeah, hit it.
Two quick things, but one is there is such thing as overutilized. People ask me that all the time, right? There's a couple of different definitions about it. Well, if you're pulling 10,000 pounds in something that's only rated for 5,000 pounds, I wouldn't call that overutilized. I would call that misutilized. But, so for those of you who have that definition, that's fine. That too. But, there is such thing as, do you get to a point where I'll give you an example. When I first got to Fordham, we were putting like 30,000 miles a year on our 15-passenger vans. It was a lot, right? And so what was happening is we couldn't keep up. It was creating a lot of increased downtime because of the M&R needs that it had, right?
Yep, and I want to come back to that.
Yep. So that's one piece. But towards the end of its life, which was 2 or 3 years later, who wants a 15-passenger van driven by 18 to 22-year-olds that has 150,000 miles of New York City traffic on it?
Yep.
No one.
You're hitting some big picture strategy stuff here.
Yeah,
right?
I hear you. But and maybe I'm going too far. But
no, I don't think so.
But the idea is there are considerations that you must have that go beyond just pure, okay. Because on the first pass, it was, wow, you guys got 150,000 miles in 3 years. You're great at utilization. No, we weren't. We were horrible at it because we were shooting ourselves in the foot on the back end of trying to resell that vehicle and getting resale on. You know, we literally had to sit on the
through the warranty in the first 12 months.
Exactly.
Right? Like, you know, maybe 13, 14 months if you're going that far.
Exactly.
But that's, you know, so you look big picture when we talk about big picture strategy stuff. It's looking at that whole picture, and you hit the first metric, which is if you're overutilizing vehicles and you're getting too efficient, the first thing you're going to see get hit is availability.
Availability is going to get shot,
right? Which is downtime.
Those vehicles are going to go down.
Crazy. It's because we're basically beating these vehicles up way beyond what they were supposed to be.
That's a good point. Yep.
So the availability is going to be the first thing you see, which is weird because we just said in order to improve utilization, right? Like your availability is going to go up, but it's this weird like crossover.
Right.
You know, if I had a whiteboard, I'd draw it. It'd look really cool.
Yeah.
But then the second piece you mentioned, which is, you know, the resale value. And so you got to look at utilization over the, you know, what's the expected life of that asset?
It's important. Yeah.
If you could recoup an extra $10,000, $15,000 out of the asset, what's that worth to you?
Right.
You know, what would it cost you to go out and buy another asset to spread the load a little bit between those two?
Right.
And then, like you mentioned, is, you know, who wants to go buy this asset? They're down all the time because we're putting too many miles on them. We're using them too hard.
Right.
Changing
suspensions all the time, man.
Right. Well, and you're breaking stuff that's not meant to break for 10 years.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well said.
So it's like
well
not
said.
only are you past the warranty, but you're getting now, like if I were to look at this on an Orca model, you just essentially compress the entire M&R schedule into that first. So not only are you having a massive depreciation hit for the first 3 years of the asset, but now you're also having a massive M&R hit with it.
Correct.
And yet the timeline is still the same. Time doesn't change.
Exactly.
So that would be a really interesting Orca model to look at.
It was beat up, man. Yeah. We were finding that we were having to sit on vehicles because just to get that mileage to match the age expectation a little bit better, right? Which was crazy idea because it's depreciating the whole time. So yeah, anyway, that's another topic for another day to talk about how to, you know, to strategically model that. Right? Yeah.
Because there is a cost consideration.
Yeah.
You know, some people would say, well, that's awesome, Mark, because you literally beat those things to hell and they just, you know, you didn't have to go spend, maybe you were spending money on M&R, but you didn't have to go spend money on acquisition.
Right.
There was no CapEx, right? And my budget's all OpEx. So like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in some of those situations.
Yep. I can't wait for that conversation. We'll do that. Yeah.
All right.
It's like E equals MC squared, folks, generally speaking. Okay. Yep. If your OpEx is great, then something's wrong on CapEx and vice versa. Yep. All right. So yeah, another day.
All right. Well, hey, if any of you guys want to see some of the diagrams that we've come up with or any of the models when we start talking about utilization versus availability and how those two actually complement each other and feed that data, if you want to know, like, how do I do a stakeholder interview so I can figure out what the right metric is, you know, reach out, email us at podcast@rtfleet.com. This is why we have, you know, our hosts, right? Our fleet manager experts here in the team. We'd love to hear from you. Any suggestions on that? Come to Connect. Come see us at Connect, right? Like we're all going to be speaking and talking about these subjects. You can go talk to your peers, but I'd love to sit at the feet of guys like Marc Canton and Steve and just pick their brains about stuff like this. So it's October 7th through 11th in Atlanta this year, and you can just go check that out on our website, rtafleet.com.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, but otherwise, we'll see you guys next time on the next episode.
All right. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post about it on LinkedIn or leave a review. Want to learn more about our fleet management software, Fleet 360? Check us out at rtafleet.com. If you want to learn more about having your fleet evaluated by our consulting team, go to fleetconsulting.com.